Well, good afternoon, and welcome to our final discussion of the day. I'd like our speakers to start by introducing themselves and the organizations that they represent and the work they do. Kylie, would you like to get us started?
Yes, I would love to. Hello, my name is Kylie Rich. I'm a 17-year-old youth activist from Wisconsin. I'm currently here with the Sandy Hook Promise organization. I'm serving my second year as one of 9 students from across the country on their youth advisory board. And I also implement a lot of the Sandy Hook Promise prevention program at my school through my school's SAVE Club, which is Students Against Violence Everywhere. And I'm serving my second term as president of that club. I work on violence prevention curriculums. I do some lobbying and really just bring youth voices to the table.
I'm Tony Montalto. I'm the father of Gina Rose Montalto, the victim in the Parkland school shooting back on Valentine's Day of 2018. Since that time, the families who had a loved one taken have banded together to form Stand with Parkland, the National Association of Families for Safe Schools. I've been the president since its inception. We work to advocate for safer schools on the local, state, and federal level. We look at school safety in a little bit more of a holistic way, looking at the need to secure the campus, improve mental health screening and support programs, and finally, if you choose to own one, ensure that you're owning a firearm responsibly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janelle Hughes, and I serve as the project director with the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center. We also refer to ourselves as the REMSTA Center. And we work with schools, school districts, as well as institutions of higher education in collaboration with their community partners to build emergency preparedness capacity. It's truly an honor to be on this panel with Kylie and with Tony. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do. And we're excited to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks so much for introducing each of yourselves and the work the organization does. As I travel the country and talk with school leaders, more and more I'm hearing the question or some form of the question about, hey, I have students, I have parents, I have grandparents, I have community partners, I have organizations that haven't traditionally been part of our safety and security planning, wondering how they can help. And I would like their help, but I need, what's that mean, right? Not everyone is necessarily a starting player on the team of safety. Some play in a supporting role. And so I'd really like to hear each of your perspective about what is the role of members of the K-12 community in safety and security, particularly parents, students, and others that might be looking to help, but aren't responsible for the policy and implementation of school safety in their school. Tony, would you like to get us started?
Sure. I'd say, first of all, that it's fantastic that we're seeing other groups want to get involved, because school safety is not about just one entity. School safety requires all of us coming together. Our school professionals, our mental health professionals, our students, our staff members, parents, law enforcement, mental health professionals, teachers unions, right? Anybody who can come together can be part of the team. And I think that traditionally that's been a failure of something. One of the most effective ways to take advantage of people who see the troubling signs first is to have a accurate and available reporting system for students. We saw in the NTAC 2019 and 2021 reports on averted school violence that students are the first to notice disturbing signs from one of their fellow people. It's important to allow them to have a methodology to report this so that we can get it investigated and acted upon. And giving the students that is important. Of course, next we saw that parents are the next level there in frequency and being involved and seeing troubling signs. So we do encourage the ability to have a viable reporting system.
I just like to agree with what Tony shared. You know, school safety is truly a shared responsibility, and schools and all of their community partners, as you mentioned, Dawn, play a role in protecting the whole school community. So we recommend that all emergency operations plans are developed and continually revise, the core school planning team work with partners outside of the school building. And that includes parents and families, as well as partners within the school building, including students. So whether they are part of the core planning team or a member of, the ad hoc team, parents and families and students really are invaluable to helping to build and sustain safe schools. And they just play an overall vital role in efforts to enhance security, emergency management, and preparedness. There are many ways that parents can be involved. They can, advocate for the needs, the health, and the well-being of their students and other students within the school community. They can participate in and consult district and building level emergency management teams, play a role in the incident command system, in the wake of an emergency, and also support recovery efforts. And, again, students play an integral role. They are a large subset of the school community, and thinking about all settings and in all times, including, during the school day, after school program, during extracurricular activities, athletic events, transportation to and from school, field trips, the online setting, they really have that clear perspective and voice. And students are also, like Kylie, positioned to influence their peers, offer expertise in new technologies that education agencies may consider as they're, working through reporting requirements, for example, and help leverage involvement and support from their families, caregivers, and the community. So similar to parents, students can really help strengthen, activate, and implement emergency operations plans at their school before, during, and after a potential emergency, while really reaping a meaningful connection to school safety overall.
Kind of want to piggyback off of that with the student perspective in mind. And I think when it comes to school safety, it's such a multifaceted issue that needs this element of active communication between students and the adults, whether it be teachers or our parents. I always like to talk about how students, as have been mentioned already, we're the ones that have that direct perspective. We walk into school every day. I say hi to my school resource officer every morning because he's standing at the door. We're also the ones that are sitting in our desk and listening to what's around us. If there's a water bottle dropping on the floor, we're the ones that are sitting there wondering what is that noise? Could that be a potential threat? Could that be a danger? And we're also actively communicating with our peers. And I think by opening up conversations and bringing students to light and talking about recognizing the signs of violence and what do you do about that? And it's about finding an adult that you can trust and talk to and bring those reports to. So it's definitely an intertwined issue where it's the communication between students and adults that needs to be had. And then by having that atmosphere in school of where students aren't necessarily afraid to go to their teachers with reports or feel that they have the space to do so, then that's where conversations translate outside of the school. Because I know if I wasn't necessarily brought about or made aware to the fact that I do have a spot in this conversation, some of the conversations that I've had with my parents might not have occurred. I know me and my mom have discussed multiple times of like, well, what was her school years like? And they're a lot different than mine, but all those conversations kind of add up to the fact that school safety is important and it needs to be a conversation on both ends of the spectrum.
To help families adjust and start a conversation regarding school safety, Stand with Parkland has developed 5 questions every family should ask. They're on our website on our 5 questions tab. And it's important to begin the conversation for families. It's very difficult for many families to know how to go in there. So we also provide the answers that you should be hearing from your school once you sign up on our website at standwithparkland.org. But having parents engaged in the process will help hold your school district, your school administrators, and the community in general accountable for the safety of our children. Sadly, we saw that the school district here lied about the quality and the safety of our students. Even when you had engaged parents, such as my wife who volunteered at the school, another victim's mother volunteered on other days, yet they weren't aware of the dangers of the shooter. The mental health professionals in the community were aware, law enforcement was aware, the school was aware of him, but sadly the parents weren't. So one of the changes we made here in Florida is we put forth our Parents Need to Know initiative, which was passed into law. which requires notifying parents in a timely manner to threats to a school, to school-sponsored events, or to school transportation. And we hope that with that information now required, parents and families can make a choice as to how best protect their students at school.
You're so right, Tony, and just thinking about what both you and Kylie shared, this important communication with the parents and then that communication coming back to the schools. So critical to provide a clear mechanism to maintain communication with parents, and not just when events happen. Encourage parents to attend school safety forums and trainings, request their input on issues related to school-based safety, related, to an event that happened or potential threats and hazards via surveys. You can also create parent camps and workshops during which parents and families can share their voice with school leaders and school safety planning teams and community partners. So there are so many ways to reinforce their role as key school safety planning members, but also communicating continually with them regarding any changes to EOPs and requesting their input on portions of the plan as well.
Certainly a layered approach is what we need, when we're dealing with school safety, to bring everyone under the tent and make them part of the system.
That's so important.
I like the idea of what you said about making them part of the system, because a lot of times it's almost like action is being taken too late. Whereas if we focus on really getting everyone involved and like you said, sending out surveys to parents and making sure that they're knowledgeable and aware of what's really going on in the school or what are the safety procedures, that's so important, because that's the preventative steps that are being put into motion that will then stop any violence from happening before it even begins. And that's really what the key is. And it's like, if you don't know that your school has a report line, like the Sandy Hook Promise has a hotline, if your school or parents don't know about that, then there's so much potential that is being not utilized that could potentially save lives.
You're so right. And as a part of EOP planning, we always recommend that education agencies conduct capacity assessments. So to determine, who has the skills that are needed within the school building and outside of the school building. And it's often the case that some parents or family members may have some of the skills that you need or access to community partners who can support that school or that school district. So it's just so important to, use them as a critical resource and tool as well.
And of course, having the ability to contact the authorities or contact the school people so an issue is investigated is important. That's why the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, along with the National Threat Assessment Center and the Secret Service, came out with their bystander reporting toolkit to help promote the idea of how to put these programs in place so that students, teachers, parents all have a methodology to report something. It talks about how it's important not only to give them the method to report, but also to make sure that reporting is safe and part of the everyday school environment. It's also important to make sure that the results that take place from those reports, the investigations or the actions, are transparent so people could see that the reports aren't just falling on deaf ears. So we're really happy to have been part of the group that helped work on that this spring. And we think it's a really important step for schools that don't have anything in place to take a look at that reporting guide and see how they can adapt it to their particular schools.
I think reporting is such a big part of this. And again, so grateful to be here on this conversation with you, Kylie. I think students can play a critical role in building awareness about, anonymous reporting options such as tip lines, as can parents. Sometimes, the voice of the student or the family community can be stronger than the voice of school leaders. So, using them to build that awareness of tools and systems that can support with the before, during, and after aspects of planning. So as you said, Kylie, thinking about prevention, protection, and mitigation, and not just bringing people in when it's time to respond and recover.
Right, exactly. And I think by we've talked about reporting systems, and I like the idea of making them a more normalized part of school. I think in so many cases, reporting systems are made. Yes, there are specific crisis lines dedicated to those in crisis or stuff that needs immediate threat, but there are other options too that students can use for like reporting stuff, such as warm lines, or even like I know Wisconsin has Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin. It's like those things that need to be normalized because there are things that should be reported that aren't necessarily being reported. And then it goes into the element of transparency is that students, I feel like when obviously there needs to be transparency when it comes to, parent education, but I also think it's very valuable to have that transparency or as much transparency as possible when it comes to students, because a lot of times those reporting systems feel like I just told you what I saw or what's going on with a friend or a threat that I saw, but what is being done with that report? I don't know if that necessarily makes sense, but as a student, I think there's at times a disconnect there where it's like, is what I'm saying being heard?
So, that's what we're hopeful, and that's why the reporting toolkit talks about that need for transparency. It's also important to have the teachers and the parents have a way to report things, because not everybody and not everything you see that's concerning will be solved with a call to 911. And quite frankly, if we aren't proactive in stopping this, the effects are terrible. The effects are terrible, not just as my family lives every day with the loss of my beautiful daughter Gina at her school, but it continues to permeate our community. It continues to permeate through the entire school district. And we have to come together to find ways to be proactive and stop these things.
Well, thank you each for taking so much time. And I'm inspired, candidly, at the idea that there are folks out there that want to volunteer, that want to get more engaged in school safety and security, that are outside of the classroom and school buildings. And thanks for the discussion on the role of where they might fit. I want to hear from each of you about what you're seeing out there in the K-12 environment, about where this is working well, where involving community members, parents, students, where those voices are really heard and the process is turning out better and safer schools. What strategies, what resources, what lessons learned have you heard from your experience and from the field? Janelle, will you get us started with this question?
Sure, and this is a hard question because honestly, we've seen so many great examples of, parent, family, and student engagement. But I think one that sticks with me is Ohio and their State Family Engagement Center. They presented at Ohio School Safety Center's 2021 Summit, and I just still remember what they shared around legislation in their state, related to school emergency operations plan development and the requirement that parents of current students must be consulted in development of the plan and actually having one parent representative sign the EOP. They also talk about how they use that multi-tiered system of support to, talk about school safety in 3 different scenarios with that tiered approach to family engagement. So, as Tony mentioned earlier, we really think about school safety from a holistic perspective. So a lot of our conversations around school safety are framed around adversarial or human caused threats. We also like to think about natural hazards, technological hazards, biological hazards, as also the national preparedness mission areas, prevention, protection, mitigation, and response and recovery. And thinking about ways to integrate parents and families into all of those phases and aspects. And I think Ohio has done a really good job of that. And it can be difficult when developing an EOP to kind of figure out, okay, which portions of the plan should I share with parents and families? What is safe to share? What would be appropriate to get their input on? And when we think about sections of an emergency operations plan, we think about the development of what we call threat and hazard specific annexes. So, those portions of the plan that relate to a specific type of threat or hazard. So an active shooter situation versus a hurricane. And then also developing functional annexes, and those functions relate to actions that you'll actually take, such as locking down, sheltering in place, or reunifying families with their students. And so I always think about the family reunification annex is just one of many functional annexes that parents and families can help inform. In the event of an emergency, there are so many things to consider, and how are you going to work to account for all students? How are you going to, as Tony mentioned, communicate with families, when an incident happens? How are you going to make sure that the reunification site is safe and that, you have mental health professionals on site in the case that, there is loss, that, parents need support with managing. And we've honestly, we feature a few sample family reunification annexes on our site within our toolbox, and we also created a sample family reunification annex. But I think it's just one example of ways that you can involve parents and families directly in planning. And there are so many examples also with involving students. Kylie is one of them. We hosted a webinar on the role of students with the Maryland Center for School Safety and Lincoln County School District, and kind of looking at the ways that they've worked to bring students, via ambassador programs that they host, inviting them to meetings with legislators so that they can learn and share their voice as they're, thinking about, upcoming legislation related to school safety. Involving students in efforts to beautify the campus, but really with a focus on crime prevention and environmental design. We've seen a lot of that, even bringing in students to conduct damage assessments, and to promote wellness and stress management programs. So there are really more good examples than bad examples that I would recommend here in reference. So those are just a few. And again, it's really inspiring to see Kylie here as well as Tony. I think they are exemplary examples of what's happening at the state and local level to engage parents and families, and we need to see more of that.
Mm-hmm. To hop off you, Janelle, I am a big fan of really bringing in the students, and I think you did a great job of talking about how to bring students into that conversation. What I have found amongst myself and my peers is that there is more need/want than ever from students to really focus on preventing violence in our schools. And I think by having access to digestible lessons, like from my experience, this summer I was out in DC lobbying for no-cost preventative programs that Sandy Hook Promise offers, and it focuses on programs called Start with Hello, which really just implements the idea into students. Is isolation is a key factor that can really play a big part into school violence. And by taking the first step of saying hello, you can make someone's day and make that community involvement, and that right there is preventing violence. There's also programs like Know the Signs, where it shows you, well, what are the signs of someone who might be struggling? And that's just one way that students can get involved, by having those lessons accessible to them and resources that go along with them, to really be well, if I'm seeing this, what does that exactly mean? What are the steps that I need to take? Does that mean finding that trusted adult, or does it mean reaching out to that person and taking them in as a friend? So I think by taking those lessons, it's valuable. And like you said, just bringing students to the conversation in general. I've learned so much. I'm thankful that I've been able to have the spot of meeting with my legislators, but you can even take it to a local level. And I would just encourage students, and Sandy Hook Promise has always done an amazing job at really recognizing the importance of students' voices. So whether it be meeting with the legislative or meeting with your school board, because they're the ones that kind of decide or implement school safety procedures, it's really getting to the root, talking with your admin, talking with your teachers. I think just having those open conversations are some of the best strategies that we can use today.
Well, certainly having, again, bringing many members of the community into this school safety conversation is important. Here in Florida, we passed the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act back in 2018, and that required to have a reporting system. We have Fortify Florida, plus there's others that are available throughout the state, including the Safer Watch program, which we use here in Broward County. These systems can do so much. And through the use of these systems over the last 5 years, we've seen many attacks stopped. One in particular that stands out was one from 2021 in Fort Myers, where a student saw someone exhibiting troubling signs, and they reported them via the app. And law enforcement in the schools were able to investigate it and get that person help before they were able to carry out their plan that they had to attack the school. Additionally, there's been many other instances where, through the behavioral threat assessment programs, which we passed, have taken proactive steps to find someone who's exhibiting concerning behaviors and then get them the help they need before they resort to violence. We've all worked hard to bring programs for students to have them available in our communities. But how do you connect the students with the program? In many states, the behavioral threat assessment process is that. We take the student exhibiting the troubling sign, and then we get them into the program where they can get help, again, before they resort to violence. As far as reunification goes, glad to hear that the REMS-TA has some of those things available on their website. In Florida, last year's school safety law actually made it a requirement to have a model reunification plan for each of our 67 school districts in place. I can tell you from personal experience that you need to do something before tragedy strikes, because after tragedy strikes, it's a disaster. Some of our families waited in a hotel till the wee hours of the morning to find out the worst news a parent could possibly hear. Others of us, like my wife and I, we were at the hospital when we heard that Gina passed away, and then left on our own to figure out the next step. I'm sure we weren't the world's safest drivers as we drove back to our newly broken home. So there's many things that are involved, but we do see steps being taken. We do see resources that are available. Of course, schoolsafety.gov has many of these resources, cultivated again from the Department of Education, Justice, Health and Human Services, as well as Homeland Security. It's vital that people are aware of the multitude of resources at schoolsafety.gov and take a look at those. That's one of the goals, of course, of these summits that we have every year, is to make people aware, to make our school communities, our parents, our students aware of the resources that are available through many outlets.